If you'll take your Bibles and turn to 1 Peter 1, verse 13. 1 Peter 1, 13. This passage says this, "Wherefore, gird up the loins of your mind, be sober, and hope to the end for the grace that is to be brought unto you at the revelation of Jesus Christ." We'll read it once more. It says, "Wherefore, gird up the loins of your mind, be sober, and hope to the end for the grace that is to be brought unto you at the revelation of Jesus Christ." Let's pray. Lord, we thank you for your goodness to us. Lord, we thank you for the great hope that you have given to us. And Lord, I pray that you'd help us as we look into your word tonight. Lord, that you would use your words to strengthen, to help, to give hope to believers. Lord, give me strength. Lord, help my feeble words. And we pray these things in your name. Amen. Have you ever noticed that the promise of something good to come can give you strength? One example of this is a man named Louis Zamperini. When his bomber was downed during World War II, he and the pilot of the plane, Russell Allen Phillips, survived 47 days on an open inflatable life raft in the Pacific Ocean with almost no provisions. That was by far a record. During that time, they were strafed multiple times by a Japanese aircraft, attacked by sharks that actually hurled themselves into their raft. They had to beat them off with oars. Starving and without food. For their meals, he would visualize and describe in minute details meals that his mother used to cook for him. And he would describe it to the others, and they would enjoy that as their meal. They said it actually helped for a little bit. 47 days after his plane went down, and some 2,000 miles farther west, he was finally captured by the Japanese. Now, in World War II, the knowledge of that America was winning the war gave hope to thousands of starving and brutalized POWs who were not only captured but enslaved in Japanese prison camps. Over and over again, it was documented that when men gave up hope, they very quickly died. That hope not only buoyed their spirits, it saved many lives. Louis Zamperini's hope helped him survive the torture, the starvation of prison camps, but when the war ended, even though the U.S. government had declared him presumed dead over a year earlier, Louis Zamperini was reunited with his family. As great as his hope was, Louis Zamperini later was saved and inherited a much greater hope. On a much more mundane level, have you ever noticed how the promise of an upcoming vacation can help you hang on during a very busy season at work? How about just the week? Doesn't Friday seem to be a little bit easier to handle, just knowing that the next day you have a day off? Here in this passage, we are told to hope. But this hope is much more sure than any hope that Zamperini had and any hope we just talked about. This hope is based on God himself. Now, in Bible study, we're going to be looking at verse 13. It's important to understand the meaning of words to be able to understand the passage. But after that, in order to understand the text, we need to be able to understand the connections between the words and phrases. And we're going to point a few of these out to you. But looking at the phrase, I want to point out several connections between these phrases. It's a very short verse. It just says this: "Wherefore, gird up the loins of your mind, comma, be sober, comma, and hope to the end for the grace that is to be brought unto you at the revelation of Jesus Christ." Really, there's three instructions given here right in a row. But how do they relate together? First of all, you see, gird up the loins of your mind. It's an idea of getting ready for some action. What are we supposed to get our minds prepared to do? The next phrase says, be sober. But what are we supposed to think seriously or soberly about? Both of these first phrases are really participles. That's the idea of they modify something else, the main thought of the passage. And the main thought is that next phrase, hope to the end for the grace that is to be brought you at the revelation of Jesus Christ. Now, I want to talk a little bit about this phrase, and then we'll get back to those participle phrases that modify it. First of all, it says, hope to the end for a grace that is to be brought to you at the revelation of Jesus Christ. This is a grace that you do not have yet. This is a future grace that you will have. What kind of grace is this that will be brought to you at the appearing of Christ Jesus? What is this great hope that we have? You know, and while we look at this, and we could probably think of things right off the top of our heads that it's talking about, future grace that's going to be brought to us. We think of things like heaven. But it's probably even more helpful if we were to look at what the context is. And there's a link in this verse that points to exactly what Peter has in mind when he talks about this grace that will come when Christ is revealed. You notice the very beginning of the verse says, therefore. And that points back to something. That points back to what has just been gone over in this passage. So we need to look and see what it is. What are some of these things? If you just scan back through the first verses, we've already preached through those. But a couple of things that he's pointing to is, first of all, in verse 3, Christ's own resurrection is the basis of our living hope. That the resurrection of Jesus Christ is really proof of a hope that we're going to have. And what is that hope? We see it in verse 4. We have an inheritance. And that inheritance will never perish, will not be corrupted or defiled, and is kept in heaven for us by God. All right? We're talking about our inheritance of heaven. We're talking about our inheritance of being able to spend eternity with Christ forever. And I was thinking about that, and there's several things that just, you know, when we think about that, things that can be very helpful for us as we look forward to that, as we hope in that. First of all, do you realize that when you're in heaven, you will have absolute freedom from suffering? Many of you tonight are suffering in different ways. As I look across this crowd, I see different people, and I know there are specific needs that are going on right now in people's lives. Some are great, some are small. But when we see Christ, when he is revealed, there will be no more suffering. What would it be like to never visit another doctor? To live in perfect health? You know, all that, that backache you had last night. All right, some of you, it's much worse than that. None of that anymore. There will be no persecution in heaven, okay? Those of you who talk about the Lord at your job site and get those kind of smart remarks, or maybe those jokes that get that are said behind your back, or maybe they sort of tease you as you walk by about, by saying even foul words just because they want to get your goat. You won't see any more of that. You'll never watch loved ones waste away with cancer or heart disease or dementia. In fact, we'll never again fear for our jobs or our retirement funds or all those kinds of things, money. In fact, there will never be such a thing as worry. What a wonderful thing that will be. Freedom from suffering. That's just a small part of the inheritance that we have. One other thing I wanted to point out, freedom from sin. Our walk with Christ will never again be hindered by sin. Christian, do you hate the feeling that comes when you realize you've been walking on your own for a while, you've been pursuing your own way, and that your faith and your walk with God have been hindered by it? Don't you hate that? You've been, maybe for a time, you've been walking with the Lord and enjoying great fellowship with him, and then all of a sudden you just realize that you have just walked away from him, and you've got to get your heart right. The truth is that he never leaves his children. He never forsakes them. But how often do we turn our back on him? Maybe just let go of his hand and say, there are just a few things I want to handle my own way. And soon we find ourselves struggling to find the way back to him. We will never, ever again sin when Christ returns. What a great thing that will be. Freedom from suffering, freedom from sin. And there are so many myriad of things that we could point out as we think about the joys and the great benefits of heaven. It's worthwhile for us to do that, to spend time thinking about those things. Another thing that we can give hope to as we look back in this passage to what exactly Peter was talking about, was that in verse 5, if you look at verse 5, that God guards us by giving us fresh supplies of faith. He says here, who are kept by the power of God through faith unto salvation, ready to be revealed in the last time. If you're a Christian, you're not just on your own, trying to build up enough faith to stay in the faith until the time of Christ. God is giving you faith. He's keeping you by his power by giving you faith to carry you through until the day that you see him. What a wonderful hope that is. And in verse 9 you see that our salvation will one day be complete, receiving the end of your faith, even the salvation of your souls. Now this isn't just talking about the time when you started your walk of salvation, when you told the Lord, Lord, I'm sorry for my sins, I put all my trust in you. This is talking about the completion of that time when we'll stand before him, when all that sin, all those things will be wiped away. We will never again face all those things, and we are complete, perfectly complete in him. What a wonderful thing that will be. These are all things that we have to look forward to. These are things that Peter, under inspiration of God, was pointing back towards. And he's telling us that we need to guard our hope. Look at that. Look at the passage once more. Verse 13. Wherefore, gird up your loins of your mind, be sober, and hope to the end for the grace that is to be brought unto you at the revelation of Jesus Christ. It says to the end that we're supposed to hope for this. The idea is that we continually are hoping on that through the rest of our lives. Hoping to the end. But it just doesn't tell us just to hope. This passage just doesn't say hope, and it goes on and leaves us there, and we wonder, how are we supposed to do that? It actually gives us some direction. And we see that in those first phrases that we talked about. First of all, let's look at the first phrase, wherefore gird up the loins of your mind. Now this phrase, girding up the loins of your mind, is a very picturesque phrase. And there's several different ways it was done in the Old Testament. But basically, in the New Testament times, many of the people wore these long flowing robes. All right? And some of you ladies probably realize it, but it's not easy to run in a long dress. I remember at one time when I was at college, and I was supposed to play my trumpet for a choir piece, and they used choir robes, and so the trumpet player had to wear choir robes. And I remember I come out the door and I start stepping up those stairs, and all of a sudden I caught it and I about touched the steps with my nose, and my trumpet just barely survived that. There's a reason why they girded up their loins, all right, so they wouldn't fall when they're trying to do some action. And one of the ways they would do it, if some of the people, they would take their robe and they gather it, take all the extra in the front, and then they tuck it between their legs and tie it in front. Some others, in other times, they would take a belt and they would tuck that robe into the belt, so it would come down to their knees and wouldn't trip them as they ran. But the idea was preparing themselves to do some work. If they're going to run somewhere, Elijah did that. He girded up his loins and he ran in front of the chariot. All right? So preparing yourself to do some action. Now the funny thing is, if you look at this phrase, you think of the idea of girding up your loins, getting ready to do some action, and you think, okay, what do you want me to do? All right? And really it says, it's what do you want me to think? All right? You're supposed to gird up the loins of your mind. So the idea isn't just, okay, do 5 things or do something that'll help you keep your hope in God. It's girding up the loins of your mind, right? He's saying, prepare your minds to put your hope in God. You need to cultivate in your own mind hope in God. And really, it's the idea of doing it, exercising your minds towards hope. What are some ways we could do that? How about if you were to spend some time meditating or memorizing promises of God? How about fellowship with other believers, encouraging each other in those same truths? You know, there's times, whether it's been in a hospital room or maybe even at a funeral, when the fellowship and encouragement of each other in just looking at what God has for us can be so great. How about this? Allowing losses to drive you to God and His rewards. I have often thought about how the loss of loved ones often grows people's desire for heaven. A spouse who has lost their husband or wife often is much more quick to think about heaven. And that's good and right. We should allow our hopelessness in earthly things drive us to desire things that matter much, much more. You know, instead of our thin earthly hopes, we need to replace them with hopes that are much better in their ends and much surer in their guarantee. Let me say that once more. We need to replace our thin earthly hopes with hopes that are much better in their ends. That means what you'll get with that hope. And much surer in their guarantee. That means who promises it to you. Many of our hopes are based on the thinnest of premises. You know, it's something we just like. I mean, last week they had a presidential debate in South Carolina. There were 5 or 6 men who stood on the platform and debated. Now, in all reality, most of those men don't have a very big chance at all of becoming president, but they have their hope in that. Only one of them, possibly, will get that position, but there's a lot of people who are hoping in it. Us, on the other hand, when it talks about this hope, it's something that is guaranteed to every one of us that believe in Jesus Christ. It's a totally different kind of thing. Our hopes are not thin. They're not based on thin things, and they're not thin promises either. Poor promises that are just weak. You know, oh, it's great that you'll get a raise in your job or a promotion. And how quickly will that be gone? How quickly will you even remember that you got a promotion and you'll be working for the next one? But our promise, our hope in Christ will be forever, and it will not decrease. I want to share with you a passage that really talks about this whole idea of directing our minds to hope. Psalm 42. If you look at Psalm 42, this is just one of my favorite passages. Many of you are familiar with this psalm because it starts out with, "As the hart panteth after the water brooks, so panteth my soul after thee, O God." But I want to point you to verse 5, where it says, "Why art thou cast down, O my soul, and why art thou disquieted in me? Hope thou in God, for I shall yet praise him for the help of his countenance." And then look at verse 11. It says, "Why art thou cast down, O my soul, and why art thou disquieted within me? Hope thou in God, for I shall yet praise him, who is the health of my countenance and my God." Here you see the psalmist doing exactly what we're told to do here, to exercise his mind to the purpose of remembering the hope that he has. You know, he's talking to himself. Do you notice this? In verse 5, he's talking to himself. He's saying, "Why art thou cast down, O my soul?" He's actually addressing his own heart and his own thoughts and saying, "Why are you discouraged?" There is a hope. And it was Martin Lloyd-Jones who talked about this passage and said, one of the problems that we have is that we listen to ourselves too much. Instead, we should be preaching to ourselves, just like this psalmist was doing. You know, don't just listen to all those things that are discouraging. Take yourself, he says, take yourself in hand and preach to yourself. Why are you discouraged? Hope in God. That's what the Bible is telling us here in this passage and back in 1 Peter. But in 1 Peter, there's a second phrase, and it says this: "Be sober, It's the idea of being very serious-minded. You know, when a person is not sober, they're not thinking clearly. You know, more specific term goes beyond not just being not being drunk, but to be serious, to be focused about a task. For example, men that are floating in a life raft, upon realizing they're out of rations, grow very sober. The weight of their situation causes them to be very serious about that. And they'll do things like rationing the little bit of water they have. They'll take steps. But I ask you, do you realize how desperately we need to hang on to this hope? Are you ready to get serious about focusing on your hope in Christ? These two phrases together point out how desperately important it is that we direct our thoughts to the hope of the great future grace that God will give us. In closing, how are you doing in this vital area of hope? Where do your hopes lie? Are they the feeble hopes of man? Are your hopes based on people? Do they lie in people? Do your hopes lie in your job or your profession? When you think of the sum of your hopes, is that where most of them go? Do they lie in yourself, your abilities, your hard work, your talents, your good looks? Or do they lie in Christ? So often I find myself looking with hope to things that are elsewhere when this is where I need to be driving my hopes from. I'm looking for things that look like they're going to be better in the future. And yet the future that is the brightest is the future that's here in this passage. So where do your hopes lie? I ask you to think about that. But secondly, how carefully do you guard your hope in Christ? God doesn't want us to be half-hearted hopers. All right? He tells us to be diligent, to be serious about it. He wants you to fight for hope, to strenuously contend in your mind and against all doubts for the hope he promises. How are you doing in those areas? Are you hoping in right things? And how hard are you guarding your hopes?